So, very good morning to everybody. Thanks for showing up for this session. Great to have you here. We begin with a very short introduction. This is Carola Frediani. Italians, I'm sure, if they are in the room, will know her from her work for La Stampa. And Carola has just published a book, and I hope I get the title right. It's Guerre dirette. So basically right on the topic, wars in the networks. And yeah, please welcome Carola.
Thank you. Is it okay? Works? Okay. So this is Marcel Rosenbach, a journalist from Der Spiegel, and actually he has been covered for many years security and national security issues, and also leaking WikiLeaks, Snowden files. So he has a great experience on some of the most interesting developments in journalism in the last years. And he was here also. No? Not working? Yeah, now maybe, okay, it's better. So he was here also last year in a panel, in some panels. And so I'm very happy to be here again, sharing this table with Marcel. So maybe you can explain a little bit where we start and why we decided to do this.
So what we're trying to do is we want to have a conversation, and it's not a classical keynote or panel discussion, but a conversation, and we hope to include some of you, some colleagues, if you're around, some interested people interested in journalism and media. And basically what we want to talk about is not a very comfortable topic for journalists, actually, because we're talking about new challenges that we see. And we see them because the nature of leaks that we have been dealing with as journalists have changed quite dramatically over the last couple of years. And I'd like to start just with some visuals to bring you in the middle of the topic so that we can perhaps start the conversation from the same level. And I want to start with an example. Does that work? Yeah. With an example from 2014 you might or might not be familiar with. If you were an employee with Sony back in 2014, back in November 2014, there might be a good chance that your screen in your office would have looked like this, hacked by GOP. You remember perhaps the Sony hack. It was big headlines everywhere around. And the interesting thing about the Sony hack was that there was an attribution of the hack quite early on, which is not common, actually. As you know, the attribution is very difficult in the cyber world. But here, there has been an attribution quite early on made by the US government, actually. And you see the flag. The attribution went in direction of North Korea, in this case. So with what happened with the data in the Sony hack? Well, it ended up, among others, on WikiLeaks in a nice searchable database. The data of employees, private emails, and perhaps you remember were social security numbers and other private information. And media all around the world, I guess La Stampa, we on Der Spiegel, and many media outlets around the world started reporting on the leaked data. I don't know if you remember the stories. Most of them were, I would say, rather gossipy. There was bad comments on the talent or the missing talent of Angelina Jolie. There were some rather racist jokes about Barack Obama among Sony employees and even Sony management. And something set in that brings us to the topic, because a lot of criticism on the reporting set in pretty early on. Of course, Sony itself not only criticized the reporting on the leak, but also threatened journalists who were dealing with the material. But others as well, like the playwright and screenwriter Aaron Sorkin, he called the coverage morally treasonous, for instance. And media like the New York Times that had been reporting on the content of emails made it a topic. The editor of the New York Times wrote an editorial defending the reporting, basically. The public editor of the New York Times did a piece on the reporting. So it was already a discussion back in 2014 how to cope with that sort and that nature of material. A more recent example started with an email that basically said, hey John, your Gmail account has been hacked. Please go to this site and change your password. It was not John Doe, but it was John Podesta, as you know, the campaign manager of Hillary Clinton in last year's election campaign. And if something could have made you a little bit suspicious about this email was perhaps the link to change password, because it was a bit.ly link. It was not an open link to some Google domain, but it was a bit.ly link, so you couldn't actually see on first hand where to go. Actually, to his credit, John Podesta got a little bit suspicious, and he asked his IT guys, should I do this? Is this legitimate? And they answered him, yes, you can do it, which was a major mistake, because, that's him, because his emails in the end, the whole set ended up like the DNC mails as well on WikiLeaks. And just to show you that it doesn't have to be only pure politics, I have another recent example from last year for you, and that is from the other side of the world. That's from the Australian, and that was about an economic leak with political implications, if you will. It's about the defense industry. Australia was then in negotiations with a French company, DCNS, about a very, very big defense contracting deal. It was about submarines, and the volume was in the, I think, $38 billion sphere. So a very, very important defense contract. They were in negotiations, but of course there was competition. Other big defense companies wanted to have the deal as well. One German company was very eager to get the deal, ThyssenKrupp, but others as well. And pretty late in the process, there was a leak. And more than 20,000 pages of clandestine material from this French company, DCNS, was leaked to the Australian, so to one newspaper outlet, not to an intermediary, not to WikiLeaks or other intermediaries, but to this newspaper directly. And they reported it. It was a big splash. It made international news. And the documents looked like this. And it was basically everything you needed to know about the submarine and about its technical features. And the interesting thing is that the French company, DCNS itself, spoke, as you can see, to Reuters about the leak, and they called it, it might be economic warfare. So, Carola, what is new about the three examples? I mean, we have been talking about leaks since decades, practically, electronic leaks perhaps since 2010 with the first big WikiLeaks splashes. There have been so-called official leaks since there is journalism, so authorities or politicians giving information to one certain journalist or a media outlet, that's part of the game. But what do you see is the new quality or the new nature?
Yeah, of course, digital leaks have, at least two aspects which differs. One of these is, of course, quantity. You can really leak massive quantity of data. It's much easier to do it. And of course, the other one is that you can play more easily with misattribution. And that's where state hacking and state leaking could step in and play a role more easily. I mean, we had a lot of state hacking in the last years. At least it became more visible, I think, starting from 2010. But it was a lot, in 2010, it's an important year because we had like Google denouncing Chinese cyber espionage, so the so-called Operation Aurora. And also we had the case of Stuxnet in Iran, which was, an attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. Later on, we discovered that it was made by US and Israel. And it was, but usually state hacking, it was more like, I want to do a cyber espionage, okay? So, or even sabotage in some cases, like in Iran. So it's more like a long-term, silent, persistent, but really silent, quiet activity. You don't want to be discovered. You don't want to go visible. When you are discovered, okay, because it's someone succeeded in understanding what's going on, but you didn't want to. Later on, in more recent years, we had more cases of hacking and leaking, where it seemed that the leaks was the main objective of the hack, where you have maybe state hacking and trolling, state hacking and in order to disrupt a system or to disrupt the info ecosystem. And where it's like, I think where this kind of activity can play more with the media, in the sense that it can try to take advantage of the information ecosystem. And here is where I think journalists, as a journalist, we should be more cautious, more wary, because it's a ground, it's not a difficult ground, and also, for instance, if you think, for instance, of attribution, it's a very hard thing to do when you talk about hacking. And I just give an example about this. I mean, for instance, its attribution is hard, but also it's difficult because you can try to use attribution to for false flags operation. You know what is a false flag operation? It's an operation where you pretend to be someone different from who you are, right? And of course, if you do it on the digital, on the digital realm, it's easier to do. So, for instance, I followed Anonymous movement for some years, and I remember that the possibility that someone else could try to use some anonymous campaign in order to do something was always there, was always on the table, There were like people and observers who would wonder whether some psychological operation made by states could be a risk within Anonymous, right? So there was like the risk of someone trying to influence a cyber campaign, to hijack it, to use it as a vehicle for, strategic leaking or attacking someone. Okay, so it was always on the table, but at the same time, you could still tell the difference between a bottom-up campaign from some campaign which suddenly popped up out of the blue and was just conducted maybe by one entity, by one persona or two personas. And we saw something similar, for instance, connected to the last summer when there was the DNC hack, the Democratic National Committee hack, when connected to that same news, there was also this news about the breach of the World Anti-Doping Agency, the WADA. I don't know if you remember it. It was like minor news, but it was interesting because it's been claimed by this group, which was Anne Poland on Twitter, like Anonymous Poland, but it was kind of a strange activist account, and some researchers then looked at it and, like, for instance, at the tweets connected to it, and they found that there were like like 8,000 tweets made in just 2 days from like 7,000 Twitter accounts, which were pushing this data breach. And I mean, it was a little bit strange, right? Because it wasn't a normal activist behavior. So just a little example to explain sometimes how much it can be, tricky to deal with these kind of things online, especially when, it's very difficult to understand motives or who is behind something.
Absolutely, especially when it comes to information warfare as part of intelligence work. And actually, in the American, in American terms, you can hear often people speak about weaponizing information. And actually, that again is not new. Information operations basically are around since intelligence services exist. The KGB talked about active measures, and the German, East German Stasi aktive Maßnahmen. But it's not only the Eastern Bloc, of course. If you remember the Snowden revelations, we have here a slide back from 2013-14. It's from the GCHQ, the British Second Intelligence Service, that basically talks about the exact same thing: using information, using data to deny, disrupt, degrade, and deceive, and not only deceive the public, but deceive media and journalism and trick them into reporting with a certain spin as well. You see here, and the first point is explicitly talk about leak confidential information to companies or to the press via blogs, etc. So, basically, what Carola just mentioned, if we try to break down what is really new and where the problem lies for journalists, you said it. Intel services used to do that all the time and decades ago, but they did it quietly. And they presented the results of cyber espionage to leaders, very short, very small circles, as so-called finished intelligence. Now we find those mass depositories we've seen on intermediaries like WikiLeaks, DC Leaks last year, which came out of the blue, or through certain hacker personas like Guccifer 2.0, who was the first last year, who released batches of this information that mingled into the US election. So, what are the problems for us, for the media, for journalists who are confronted with that? What has changed to our reporting on the WikiLeaks badges in 2010 to the Snowden reporting? One important, perhaps the most important factor is there is no direct contact to the source, and we don't know the source. And as Carola has showed you, it's really hard to attribute as a journalist. It's even hard to attribute as an intel service and to do cyber forensics. And the last batch of information that was released through WikiLeaks, Vault 7, showed you that actually intelligence services are taking a huge effort to make false flag operations and to hide their traces. So it's really, really hard. Then you have, of course, a huge amount of data, which is hard to digest, to understand, and to fact check. And the danger, I think, is pretty clear. And that's a big difference. A big difference. We had it was a pain, but we had the possibility to go back to sources like Edward Snowden and talk to him through technical means. Some of us directly. We knew that it was Chelsea Manning behind the leak of the Afghan war logs, the Iraq war logs. Although she was called quite correctly, so the alleged source, it was clear that she was the source for that material. So we knew where it came from. We knew about the motives of the leaker quite a bit. We knew it in very outspoken terms from Edward Snowden, who in his first video that he did in Hong Kong in the hotel room with Laura Poitras quite elaborately talked about the reasons why he would come forward, why he would act like a whistleblower. Now we are being confronted with huge data sets, and we as journalists oftentimes do not know where it comes from, do not know the motives and the interests of the leakers. What can happen?
Yeah, and this is actually important, what you just said. Like you, for instance, you worked on the Snowden files, right? So I guess I guess it was something challenging, but at the same time, maybe you took your time in order to understand the documents, or to try to get contextual information, to talk to experts. I mean, that's maybe that we can tell us something about it. But for instance, you have a case like this, and and as you said, you may have also like a massive, sudden dump of data. Like we had this with recently with WikiLeaks. With Vault 7, one of the latest releases on WikiLeaks, we had this sudden dump of a lot of documents and data, also very technical, right? So, and this is very challenging for journalists because, of course, you have a lot of pressure on, like writing fast, writing about it, because you can't just miss completely the story or wait for 2 days before going out. It's really, so you have to decide what to do because of course that you had, in that case, you had like the WikiLeaks press releases, which was still the WikiLeaks point of view. WikiLeaks angle, good or bad, right or wrong, was still the WikiLeaks angle. Sometimes with also maybe we can say a little bit of a spin. Not really nothing really wrong, but I mean, nothing really not correct. But there were some parts where there was a little bit of spin that could be also misunderstood sometimes. So, for instance, we had actually the case. One of the information was there where they explained that the CIA exploits were able to bypass the Signal apps, WhatsApp apps, the Signal app, and so on. Yeah, it was correct, but it was interpreted by many media and by many journalists as if the CIA was able to crack the Signal encryption, which was not the case. It was just that, if you are able to hack a device, if you are able to hack a smartphone, of course you can read what the user is writing, on the smartphone. So in a way, you bypass the end-to-end encryption offered by apps like Signal. So you needed to understand and to explain also this passage, for instance. So, of course, the problem in that case is that, you have no time, so you should decide what, maybe you should try to write the news in a very cautious way, just giving the news of the leak, and then taking your time to go into depth on specific aspects of it. But it's not, it's something that journalists should have to deal every time in a different way. So.
Yeah. And how to deal with it, actually, because we have been rather negative until this point, talking about problems and challenges, but we want, of course, to be constructive and positive and give some possible guidelines, and perhaps not only from here, but in a dialogue with you. So what can be the possible reactions to that new scenario, which we call a possible threat scenario for journalists and media? I mean, the obvious thing would be very easy, stop reporting on leaks, but I don't know how many journalists are among you. You can try to explain that to your editor, and I guess that would be a very harsh reaction you would get. So we need to find a way to deal with that and try to develop a kind of workflow, or perhaps even, if you want to take it a step higher, some ethical guidelines in dealing with leaks, reporting on leaks. And yeah, we'd like to try to start now and with you. And we have some which we come up with for you, and perhaps you have something to add, you have some criticism, you have some other ideas, but let's start. So, you said it already, right?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing that comes to my mind that could be useful is when you have such complex stories. Like if we look at, for instance, the Democratic National Committee hack, it was a very complex story, right? Because so maybe it's important to try to distinguish different lines of the story. Like you have the hacking part. You know, like the hack, who did it, how was done. Then you have the leaking line of the story. So, like the documents, and if there is something newsworthy in the document. So, in that case, it would have been what the Democratic Party did inside, pushing maybe Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders. So, you would have like the more journalistic contents of the part. And then you would have, or maybe you can have the whistleblowing line if there is a whistleblower, if, in other cases. And then you have maybe the political reaction of it. So like the US government reacting and accusing Russia or Putin. So all this, and then you have the political reaction within the US government, like, Trump, or Trump associates being maybe investigated for their relations with, alleged relation with Russia. So all these are lines that you should try to keep separate, in not confusing the different, because you can have different actors. For each line, there is a different actor, there is different motive, there is different journalistic relevance and quality. So maybe one easy thing is, to try to be clear of the different stories going on.
That is something I have personally encountered in reporting on leaks, that the opponent side, let's say a company whose data got leaked, will always act or try to act like Sony, right? And will confront you and say, look, these are stolen goods. You are reporting on stolen material. And so I think this is a very dangerous conversation. And even in Germany, for instance, there are some forces, some actors who try to use that against journalism, against media. And there's a new law in Germany on data brokerage that could eventually lead to criminalizing people who deal with leaked data. And there was quite a bit of lobbying by journalist associations. So there's a new line in this law now that says that if you deal with that professionally for professional reasons, it could be okay. But there's a big pushback when it comes to dealing with leaked data. So this can be dangerous for journalists and media as well. So I would say for us as an approach, it's really difficult to judge on the morality of the leaker. So why has the leaker acted this way? Why has he leaked the data? Because if you think about it, if you would go with that standard to any story pre-digital, in old analog times, newspapers would have been very thin if you would have judged the moral ground of the source, right? So that would be not a good idea. First and foremost, is the material authentic? That is actually can be pretty hard in itself, especially if we're talking about huge amounts of data. Another is, again, it can be a strategy of the side of a company or of the side of an institution to say, oh, be very, very careful. you know, we have checked the material, and it could be that some of it is fabricated, right? We've been through this with several leaks. None of it was true. So the material we are talking about here, if you take the submarine case, if you talk about the other case, it was in the end not disputed that it was authentic, and I think that must be really the first and foremost. The first and foremost question to ask as a journalist. The second, I think, to me in a hierarchy is really the assessment, is it newsworthy, is it adding to the public debate and understanding? And that, of course, is a tricky one, because even if you're doing it not on your own, even if you're doing it within your media with colleagues, it still is, of course, in the end, in many cases, a disputable thing, because it's a subjective judgment in the end. And you can try to make it like BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed did with the intelligence dossier of, I don't know if you remember, just a couple of weeks ago, and put it out there and say, you judge for yourself if it's authentic or not, and judge for yourself if it has public interest value or not. Or you do the judgment within your media company and sometimes come to hard conclusions, because of course as a journalist you want to publish. Of course, as a journalist, the natural thing is not to not report, but to report. And so this can be painful, of course. Another thing I think is only professional is if you don't know the nature of the source and you have some, let's say, suspicions that it might be a state actor behind it. It's of course important and only professional to do an assessment of the potential interests that come with the material. So why is this material out there at this point of time? Perhaps with that kind of spin, if there is something accompanying it, like the example you just talked about, the big WikiLeaks expose that came together with Wall 7. So those questions, I think, are natural, and they are really important to be asked within your company, within your media company.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree that there is a pushback against reporting on leaking. Actually, I'm afraid there is also in the UK something similar. Like they are thinking of, limiting, and I think it's something we shouldn't, as a journalist, we can't accept that. We can't accept like the criminalization of reporting about leaking if we are talking of newsworthy things.
The UK has the Official Secrets Act since quite a while, I think, which is perhaps a little bit a model for others right now, yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid the UK is setting a lot of models in this moment from the surveillance, privacy point of view, and not actually very good models in my personal opinion. So, yeah, I think media, as you said, I think media should take the responsibility of the judging, not the morality of a leak, but if it's authentic and if it's newsworthy. Of course, not talking about what it's not of interest for the public, not talking about private information of a leak, but just if there is really something important and of relevant. Also, maybe, I don't know, we talked about this, that sometimes there is this thing that sometimes the news is the hack and sometimes the news is the leak. And sometimes they are both. It depends. For instance, I followed the hacking team hack and leak. The hacking team was is this Italian company selling spywares in Italy and elsewhere, and has been hacked in 2015, then there was this huge leak online, and also again, like a format, WikiLeaks indexed the leaks. It's really like WikiLeaks indexing documents. It's kind of like a format, we can say, because it's been doing it in many cases. And in that case, at the beginning, the news was the hack, and for a lot of Italian media, kept being just mainly the hack. But there was also the news of the leak, of some of the contents on the leaks that could be interesting because they would give you a glimpse on a very secretive industry dealing with, intrusion systems, so something which is also regulated by European law and so on. So, yeah, in that case, you have to decide at a certain point was more interesting, the consequences for, the Italian state about this, or maybe you should have digged more about the contents.
Yeah.
So, But
sometimes you're saying that the story might be the leak in itself or the hacking event in itself. If you look at the submarine example I showed you from Australia, there was not much reporting on the secret content, meaning the technological specifications of the submarines, but that it happened and it might have been an act of economic warfare is of course news and is worth to be reported. At least that's what the Australian decided. But what they didn't do is dumping all 22,000 documents. And of course there would be, if you would have Julian Assange on the table or other representatives of WikiLeaks or advocates from transparency, they would of course argue, of course, they should be out. Information has to be free, and from a perspective of a target of one of those submarines, it's of course very newsworthy information, all the technical specification in itself. So it's a matter, of course, of a perspective. It's a matter of affiliation. If you judge about if you judge about the newsworthiness, again, it's not an easy question and not an easy task. But another perhaps ground rule we've been talking about is, and that might be a bit inconvenient for journalists who tend to pretend that they know everything and have an opinion, informed opinion on everything, is transparency. And admitting even in your reporting that you might not know everything about the background, not everything about the contents actually you're reporting, and to be honest, that you don't know if you have the full picture in reporting on those documents, because that's another thing that I think I have experienced with myself. You tend to give a lot of credit to a certain format. Let's say if you have government documents that are marked and stamped secret or top secret, they, of course, are being written by someone with interests. Perhaps they want to please their boss, they have made a great PowerPoint, they have great expectations and a great meaning of a great understanding for their own work, but it's not the full picture. And only because they are marked secret or top secret, of course, that doesn't mean that they are true, that the content is true. So I think two very important things that we perhaps should admit, perhaps not, it doesn't have to be in the story, but we have done it at Der Spiegel with boxes lately, with small boxes accompanying the text. I've seen that with many other outlets as well. There's a German outlet who does that for investigative stories, Die Zeit, where they explain how they researched the story, and even mention shortcomings in the research or potential problems.
Yeah.
And of course, another important point, we shouldn't forget that we're journalists in dealing with that material. So questioning the material and, if possible, questioning sources is, I think, very, very important. And there's one very good example, by a colleague. You know him personally?
Actually, he is here. He has a panel, I think tomorrow, or I'm not sure if tomorrow or today. Lorenzo Franceschi Bicchierai, who is a journalist from Vice Motherboard. And he did exactly this. I mean, he was able to interview, like to chat with Guccifer 2.0. Guccifer 2.0, if you don't know, is this online persona who suddenly came out just after the news broke out that the DNC had been hacked, and and after there was immediately some attribution to Russia, and almost in the same days came out this online hacker who claimed to be the person responsible for the hack, claimed to be a lone hacker, a Romanian hacker, nothing to do with Russia. And also he had the leaks, at least part of the leaks. He also claimed of having given part of the leaks to WikiLeaks, okay? And so Lorenzo, he tried to contact him on Twitter, because he had a Twitter account also, this online hacker, and I asked him, and he started to talk to him in English, but since he told him that he was Romanian, at a certain point he asked some things in Romanian using Google Translate, Lorenzo, and the hacker replied in Romanian, but then Lorenzo showed the transcript to some Romanian native speaker, and these people said that it didn't look like a native speaker, it looked like Google Translate as well. So, that was
basically,
a smart move by Lorenzo. We should credit him with it.
Absolutely. Basically, you can say the journalist has hacked the hacker, right?
Yeah.
So basically what we can learn from this example is it's really very important to stay a journalist and to question even sources or even or people or personas who claim to be the sources. That's I think an important takeaway and learning from this.
And also, if I may add, to, as you said also before, to explain, what you know, what you don't know, but also how you got some information. I mean, if you can explain it, if it's not a risk for a source, but you could explain also how you talked to a source. Like, if you talked through an online encrypted chat or through the email or, and also be careful about quoting governmental anonymous sources, I think, because they are really, I don't know, I mean, sometimes you find articles, maybe with news in them, but they are completely based on anonymous intelligence or government sources.
Yeah.
I mean, so.
And then another thing that is more about the presentation of what you've been working on, and it's a bit, it's again a bit, I think, a difficult topic for media outlets because there has been, of course, a lot of competition about reporting on leaks, and a lot of the competition in presenting is then talking about the amount of data, right? Of course, this is very catchy. And this is easy to explain, and you like to act with superlatives, like the biggest leak in history, the biggest leak of American intelligence, or the biggest leak in Italy. But I think it's important to understand that it's not about the gigabytes. The gigabytes or terabytes don't tell you about the relevance of the material, right? You can have a 2-page document that is much more relevant than 3 gigabyte of internal email of a company or an institution, right? So that is something I think we have to be careful about.
Yeah, definitely.
So
so
we have 10 minutes left, actually, and we would be happy if you have anything to add. We would be happy if you have questions, if you have completely opposite views on what we've been talking about. Is there anybody?
Don't be shy. I know that there are very good journalists sitting there following, this kind of topics. So
and standing, Philip, right?
Hi. In regards of WikiLeaks, if I look back to 2010 when the Afghani war logs and Iraqi war logs were released, at the very beginning we didn't know anything about Chelsea Manning. We had no idea who the source was. We simply, I mean, not we, and also the newsrooms that made the partnership with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks had no idea until differently proved who the whistleblower was behind. But I don't remember looking at this discussion about the background of the leak, like this should be a state-powered actor trying to influence US politics. While instead with the DNC leaks that happened, there was actually probably the biggest frame that was applied to the case, like this is Russia trying to influence the election and so on, and Julian Assange is a Russian spy. And I don't want to be the apologist here of WikiLeaks. I think they handled the leak very badly. The way they dumped all that information without any check and balance about what was there was wrong. But definitely there was something very newsworthy in there. There were news in the DNC leak, there were news in the John Podesta leaks. And wondering why there was this framing of the case as who's behind that, and not the news framing, what's the news there? So probably there has been also a shift in the ecosystem surrounding leaks and acts and how they are being framed in the public debate. Yeah. So going back to your guidelines, which I fully agree with, I think that this is my personal opinion. If a journalist receives a leaked material and the leak is genuine and is newsworthy and there is news there, the question about why am I receiving this is a second level, in my opinion, and for instance, this is also what Glenn Greenwald says. If the documents are authentic, if there is a news there, we have to publish. We have a duty to publish there in order to serve public interest. So it is incredibly complex, and I think that the final point is context. So try to frame, as Carola was saying, for instance, also the FBI leak. There was things that were very interesting and things that were hyped and not really correctly reported. So the context makes it all, in my opinion. Thanks.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, if I may just add one thing. I mean, the interesting thing is that the information warfare doesn't stop with the leak. I mean, framing and spinning is part of information warfare, and discrediting a source or discrediting media outlets and reporting is part of information warfare, of course. So it's not just dumping huge data repositories on the internet, but of course the information warfare goes on. It's a very complex scenario, absolutely.
Yeah, and also, yeah, I totally agree with Philip. And actually, I think we should also look at how politics try to use leaks sometimes for their purpose. For instance, if we look at the WikiLeaks case, if you remember, in 2010, Donald Trump and Sarah Palin were asking for execution of Julian Assange, death penalty and execution, something like this. And now in 2017, it was like, you know, we love WikiLeaks, we love Assange, or something similar. So in that case, of course, it's really politics trying to be opportunistic, depending on the leaks. But again, this is, again, another kind of story, right?
So anybody else? Something to add? Yeah?
Thanks for your talk, and I'm interested in your personal opinion. How do you value the approach of BuzzFeed publishing the secret Trump dossier and letting the audience decide about the news value? Thanks.
The BuzzFeed dossier.
Yeah.
The personal opinion. It's really a personal opinion. It's not a media decision we've made. It's just my opinion. I think, as you probably all know, the dossier had been around for at least weeks. I think actually some colleagues in the US knew it and had it physically for months, and decided not to go with it because they couldn't corroborate the story. I personally probably would be one of them, running around trying to get corroboration. What do you think?
Yeah, I would have published without corroboration, because also, I mean,
I mean, there are other ways, basically. I mean, there are. If you look at the reporting in that time frame, it's very interesting because you could see some colleagues from different outlets indirectly hinting that there could be something, even paraphrasing and quoting indirectly, right? But not publishing the whole thing, right? But it's a very interesting question, and I've been traveling with a BuzzFeed colleague. I hope she isn't angry with me if I tell you. Of course, there have been debates within BuzzFeed about that before and after that, and there are many BuzzFeed colleagues around. So here at Perugia, you can ask them directly, and I think Janine Gibson will be on a panel, the head of BuzzFeed UK, and I'm pretty sure she will be asked the same question, and perhaps she has the most interesting answer for it. Anybody else?
Yeah. Maybe microphone, because otherwise they.
Hello, again, referring to this transparency issue, do you think that because like whistleblowers are only protected by shield law, by the journalists, do you think there's like a certain whistleblower protection law at you? Is it, because it's been discussed over years in Europe throughout, in Germany as well. Do you think that it might be like erasing the problem of dealing with this transparency and the confidence in the leak and all these political thoughts behind if a whistleblower goes and says to certain journalists, just publish this and that? Do you think this is like urgent to design a certain whistleblower protection
I think we need better laws in order to protect whistleblowing because in many countries is not protected enough, especially, or even in the US, if it's about the military, it's coming from the military or coming from as less protections, so I think states should have good whistleblowing laws because actually, but some politicians are maybe understanding this a little bit because they're understanding that also in the fight against corruption. In many cases, it could be an help, something that helps. So, it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a debate, which is good. It's a debate on the European level, in the EU Parliament. It's a debate within Germany, mostly coming from opposition parties and being killed by the leading parties, at least historically. But I think personally, absolutely, we need better protection. I don't know if it's only laws, but a law would help, because what we now have is a complete injustice when it comes to the interests, the state interests. If you see that a whistleblower in the US who helps the state to get tax revenues, tax money, that like Bradley Birkenfeld did, he was a whistleblower who helped with the UBS investigation, and he was rewarded in the millions, I think a 3-figure million. He got as a reward for helping the state as a whistleblower in that case. And then you have the cases like Chelsea Manning, who got a sentence and is luckily now in May, I think she'll be free, but got a sentence of 35 years. Then you'll see that there's a great imbalance and a great injustice, and that we need a better whistleblower protection there.
There is a panel on Chelsea Manning, right, Philip? Or there's been already? Okay.
So when will it be?
Saturday.
Saturday at noon. Okay, there's a panel on Chelsea, and you're all invited to come.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming here.
Yes.
We had the sign to stop.
Oh yeah. If there are no other questions, I think.
Okay. Thanks for coming, for showing up, and discussing with us.
Thanks.
Of clandestine material from this French company, DCNS, was leaked to the Australian, so to one newspaper outlet, not to an intermediary, not to WikiLeaks or other intermediaries, but to this newspaper directly. And they reported it. It was a big splash. It made international news. And the documents looked like this. And it was basically everything you needed to know about the submarine and about its technical features. And the interesting thing is that the French company, DCNS itself, spoke, as you can see, to Reuters about the leak, and they called it, it might be economic warfare. So, Carola, what is new about the three examples? I mean, we have been talking about leaks since decades, practically, electronic leaks perhaps since 2010 with the first big WikiLeaks splashes. There have been so-called official leaks since there is journalism, so authorities or politicians giving information to one certain journalist or a media outlet, that's part of the game. But what do you see is the new quality or the new nature?
Yeah, yeah. Of course, digital leaks have, at least two aspects which differs. One of these is, of course, quantity. You can really leak massive quantity of data. It's much easier to do it. And of course, the other one is that you can play more easily.
Email was perhaps the link to change password, because it was a bit.ly link. It was not an open link to some Google domain, but it was a bit.ly link, so you couldn't actually see on first hand where to go. Actually, to his credit, John Podesta got a little bit suspicious, and he asked his IT guys, should I do this? Is this legitimate? And they answered him, yes, you can do it, which was a major mistake, because, that's him, because his emails in the end, the whole set ended up like the DNC mails as well, on WikiLeaks. And just to show you that it doesn't have to be only pure politics, I have another recent example from last year for you, and that is from the other side of the world. That's from the Australian, and that was about an economic leak with political implications, if you will. It's about the defense industry. Australia was then in negotiations with a French company, DCNS, about a very, very big defense contracting deal. It was about submarines, and the volume was in the, I think, $38 billion sphere. So a very, very important defense contract. They were in negotiations, but of course there was competition. Other big defense companies wanted to have the deal as well. One German company was very eager to get the deal, ThyssenKrupp, but others as well. And pretty late in the process, there was a leak. And more than 20,000 pages. So, very good morning to everybody. Thanks for showing up for this session. Great to have you here. We begin with a very short introduction. This is Carola Frediani. Italians, I'm sure, if they are in the room, will know her from her work for La Stampa. And Carola has just published a book, and I hope I get the title right. It's Guerre dirette. So basically right on the topic, wars in the networks. And yeah. Please welcome Carola.
Thank you. Thank you. Is it okay? Works? Okay. So this is Marcel Rosenbach, a journalist from Der Spiegel, and actually he has been covered for many years security and national security issues, and also leaking WikiLeaks, Snowden files. So he has a great experience on some of the most interesting developments in journalism in the last years, and he was here also. No? Not working? Yeah, now maybe, okay, it's better. So he was here also last year in a panel, in some panels, and so I'm very happy to be here again sharing this table with Marcel. So maybe he can explain a little bit where we start and why we
Yeah,
decided
so
to do
what we're
this.
trying to do is we want to have a conversation, and it's not a classical keynote or panel discussion, but a conversation, and we hope to include some of you, some colleagues, if you're around, some interested people interested in journalism and media. And basically what we want, Spiegel and many media outlets around the world started reporting on the leaked data. I don't know if you remember the stories. Most of them were, I would say, rather gossipy. There was bad comments on the talent or the missing talent of Angelina Jolie. There were some rather racist jokes about Barack Obama among Sony employees and even Sony management. And something set in that brings us to the topic, because a lot of criticism on the reporting set in pretty early on. Of course, Sony itself not only criticized the reporting on the leak, but also threatened journalists who were dealing with the material, but others as well, like the playwright and screenwriter Aaron Sorkin. He called the coverage morally treasonous, for instance. And media like the New York Times that had been reporting on the content of emails made it a topic. The editor of the New York Times wrote an editorial defending the reporting, basically. The public editor of the New York Times did a piece on the reporting. So it was already a discussion back in 2014 how to cope with that sort and that nature of material. A more recent example started with an email that basically said, "Hey John, your Gmail account has been hacked. Please go to this site and change your password." It was not John Doe, but it was John Podesta, as you know, the campaign manager of Hillary Clinton in last year's election campaign. And if something could have made you a little bit suspicious about this, what I talk about is not a very comfortable topic for journalists, actually, because we're talking about new challenges that we see. And we see them because the nature of leaks that we have been dealing with as journalists have changed quite dramatically over the last couple of years. And I'd like to start just with some visuals to bring you in the middle of the topic so that we can perhaps start the conversation from the same level. And I want to start with an example. Does that work? Yeah. With an example from 2014 you might or might not be familiar with. If you were an employee with Sony back in 2014, back in November 2014, there might be a good chance that your screen in your office would have looked like this, hacked by GOP. You remember perhaps the Sony hack. It was big headlines everywhere around. And the interesting thing about the Sony hack was that there was an attribution of the hack quite early on, which is not common, actually. As you know, the attribution is very difficult in the cyber world. But here, there has been an attribution quite early on made by the US government, actually. And you see the flag. The attribution went in direction of North Korea, in this case. So with what happened with the data in the Sony hack? Well, it ended up, among others, on WikiLeaks in a nice searchable database. The data of employees, private emails, and perhaps you remember were social security numbers and other private information. And media all around the world, I guess La Stampa, we on Der